Hi everybody. So this is our final group critique. What we're going to be doing is just taking a look at everybody's assignments and see if there's any um, possible changes we might make for the final submission. So this is our final critique, and the class ends this coming Saturday. That's the deadline for the Milestone 5 submission. Yeah, so I would say that just to kind of circle back to what we looked at in back in Milestone 1, we talked a little bit about what should you take away from this class? Like, what are some of the main points? And just to review those again, as somebody who teaches color theory, has taught color theory for many years, one of the things that I think is super important is just to remember that the color harmonies are there to help you to easily create a harmonious color harmony. You know, the harmonies are like monochrome. It's basically what we've just done in this assignment, where you've chosen from the monochrome, analogous, complement, split complement, triad, and tetrad. So these are our kind of like our toolbox, you could say. Now, that doesn't mean you have to stick to these. A lot of people don't, but you will notice that when you're looking for a harmony or colors that go well together, that this set is very useful. So keep those in mind when you're working in color harmony for the future, and then just also keep thinking about some of the other principles we've talked about. There's a lighter kind of design. I think we've got some up here. How different lighter designs are with darker or deeper designs, richer designs. The saturated colors, how they're quite different from the desaturated or lighter colors. When you're choosing color harmonies, you really can think about what kind of overall value effect do you want, lighter or darker, or in between. And then, is it going to be more intense with more saturated colors, or is it going to be more muted? All of these are choices that you can make based on your knowledge of color theory now. And so in addition to the color harmonies, I'll say that tints, tones, and shades, remember back from Milestone 1, are really good to remember. And hue, value, and saturation, the three properties of color. Again, that what we studied back in Milestone 1. So, if you know just these terms from this particular class, for me as an instructor, you'll have learned enough from this class, because those are the terms I think that will be most valuable to you when you're out there working in the world. Choosing colors for any particular project. So I think that's about all I really want to say here. Let's just take a look at everybody's work. Okay, Ebony. Yeah, so, in the feedback for the previous task, I sort of gave you some just ideas for how to work with um, making your design have some of the feel of the achromatic thumbnails that you previously did. And I definitely think this is looking really, really good. In fact, let's actually pull up your previous thumbnails. Hold on. So here they are. And so you've gone with the complement. And yeah, so hold on. Let me just go back to 3. Yeah. So to me, this really does sort of pick up a lot more on the, I guess I should pull up the achromatic as well, but I remember that pretty well. And it definitely has more of that quality. I really like what you've done with this in terms of the fading, adding more fades, lightening it up. I think that looks really good. And I also love just the accent colors that you've added here. Just the yellow is your accent and the dominant is the purple. So I think overall it gives you that monochrome feeling. So I think this looks really great. I think you did a nice job with it. It has like a really sort of nice use of the sort of circular shapes and the vertical lines, and I like the way that you've kind of pulled together. I think what makes this composition work is this, in this one element here, you've pulled together the circle or the curve and the vertical. So it kind of like transitions between the other lines and the vertical. Anyhow, compositions are, they're not really, once you learn the principles of creating a composition like unity and working with that, then it really is just a matter of experimenting and being creative. There isn't necessarily the like a formula for making something come together. Um, it's like the ingredients to a cake. You know, you can make all kinds of different types of cakes with very similar ingredients, um, just depending upon the proportions and the way you make it. And design is a lot like that. It's just all the ingredients are pretty similar, like shape and color and so forth. It's just how you meld them together. Anyhow, okay, so I think this looks good. I don't see any changes you need to make here. Oh, yeah, the one thing I mentioned though is I think that you had a complement before. It looks like you switched to maybe a split complement here with like the blue and the purple opposing the yellow. I think that looks really good. I just wanted to mention that I noticed that. Okay, Janae, yeah, so you had your analogous harmony, and yeah, it looks like you added in a few more shapes in here, which I think is great. You know, in a design, you can really see how in this style of design where you have these basic shapes, how you can take and just repeat, um, I think in design principles we call it transformations, where you duplicate and you also change the size of the duplicate shape, and you can just, do so many amazing things with that. So I think that looks really good. Okay, yeah, I think this looks really great. I don't see any changes you need to make. I think this is a really nice example of working with the color harmony and also, playing with the colors to, really work with the idea of depth here with the background and also focal point. Yeah, I think this seems very resolved to me. Hi Joe. Yeah, so let me just pull up your previous. Um, Here it is. Yeah, so it looks like you've gone with is it the analogous here? Analogous, split complement, split complement. Hold on. Okay, so I just kind of lined these up side by side so we could look at the colors. So on this side, it looks to me like this is your split complement right here, which is the green, kind of a greenish yellow, purple, and red here. And then on this side, it looks like you have the purple and the pink, the magenta, and the green, and you've added the yellow. So in a way, it's a little bit it's not quite a split complement at this point because you've got that fourth hue. So it looks more potentially like maybe you've turned it into a triad. So that's okay. It's okay if you want to turn it into something else. But then what I would probably do is just kind of look at, let's see here. So you might want to redo the swatches back in this particular exercise in task 2 and make it purple and blue, maybe, and like blue and green, maybe. So essentially just, it's up to you what kind of colors you want to use. You can make changes back to task 2. So, for example, you can kind of tweak this. Just make sure you're relying on any of the color harmonies we've studied, however you want to change it, so that you kind of revise it according to that. I'm not quite sure if we can put all of these hues in for, I'm kind of trying to see if there's any harm, I always like to use the traditionals. I think that, I'm trying to see here if there's any in here that would just naturally match. You've got red, purple, maybe, yeah, not really, because it's hard to get that yellow in there. So, okay, so what you might want to then just do is remove the yellow here and work with the split complement. I think that'd probably be easiest, like take the yellow and turn it into, some form of the green that you have in here. Maybe it could be like a lighter green or, just some kind of version of this green. So just to kind of experiment with that a little bit more. All right. I think that's the main thing. Just a few other things. I talked a little bit previously about how you might want to take the white and the black and work those with tints and shades. You might want to check out the feedback from the previous task. I think I talked a little bit about that. And then just make sure that you're working within, if you can, pop it into the template that's in task 3, the instructions, so that you can set it up in it's not critical, but it's, let's see if we can find somebody here with the template. The template can just help it look a little more polished. So yeah, so I think this is a cool design. Just, kind of take those 3 different points in mind about making sure it's a color harmony, and that we've studied, and that maybe you're working within pulling the whites and blacks into tints and shades of the colors like we talked about in the previous group critique, and putting it into the template. Okay, Cassie. Okay, yeah, so you experimented with a thicker line and it didn't seem right. That's great, that you tried it out, and instead you decided to go with the dotted line, which I think looks good too. I actually think either the straight line, the solid line, or the dotted line, I think they both look good. So, feel free to use whichever one you like. But yeah, so I think this was your split complement, right? Or was it a triad? Hold on. Yes, triad. Yeah, okay. I think that looks great. And I think looks like you've got a nicely resolved design. It looks very polished and refined. So, yeah, great job. Okay, Kim. Yeah, so I like what you're doing here, pulling things out. I think that looks great. And filling in more of these shapes. And I think you probably could do even a little bit more, like pulling in, a few more rings, so to speak, like you've done here. I think that's a wonderful motif. So I could see even adding a few more of those. And just, keep experimenting just a little bit more with those rings. And yeah, I think that's the main thing that I would suggest here, is even adding just a little bit more. Okay, Bianca, I just pulled up your previous design. Just curious to see what changes you made. Let's see here. Yeah, so it looks like you moved around a little bit. You reduced the amount of this particular motif from 3 to 2, which I think it looks really good. I think it adds a little more space into your design, and it puts more emphasis on these dots in the background, which I think is a really cool, piece of this design, is just that, seeing that little repetition. Yeah, and I think your colors look really good. So this is a complement of the green and the red, and yeah, I think this has really come along nicely. I think it looks very polished and complete, and really nice example of a lighter color palette. So good job with that. Okay, Cameron, so I'm including your task 2 in this feedback so that we can get this, in our video. And okay, let me just zoom in a little bit here. So you've got I really like the design choice you have here for your thumbnail, with the circles and just the vertical and horizontal lines. And you have a split complement, and a tetrad of 4 hues. So let's see here. You've got magenta and then 2 different greens. So I'm going to just pull up here the colors. So here's your magenta, which it's pretty close here, all of your colors, which is good. I think that's working pretty well. Those are looking a little bit out of, but that's probably okay. But then you have, it looks to me like you're adding in a few hues here that are not part of your harmony, like quite a few hues. So you want to make sure to really stick with these three hues. I'm seeing, you know, several other probably shapes here. You want to just go back here and be really careful about that. So how would I do this? What I would do is, to make it easy, because sometimes it can get a little bit challenging when you're working in the software, to make sure your hues really stick. You know, here's the hue slider to make sure it really sticks on that part. Is, you know, I would just write it down. This is the hue here refers to 300. So now, you know, anywhere in here, you can see that anywhere I pick within the color picker is always staying at 300. So when you use the magenta, you want to make sure that, like for example here, you'd want to make sure, if you want a tone of this color, that it makes sure that you can even just manually go to 300 here to make sure you're using the correct one. Okay, and then you want to adjust your colors in here to make sure that you're just using these three. Okay, because it looks like you started out by adding in a few additional hues here, like the yellow and the blue. So adjust that. Make sure you're just working with the harmony. And then the same with this one. It looks like you're potentially adding in maybe a few additional hues here, like there's an orange in here that doesn't belong. I would just actually go through all of the hues and just double check, making sure that you're just in the same process as this one, making sure that you just, you know, looking at that hue here for all four of them, and making sure you're just removing anything that doesn't belong, and making sure you're removing it in here. Okay. Sometimes, you know, working with, I love tetrads. You know, it's, the tetrad is like the one that is the most, has the most hues. It has 4 hues. But if you're challenged, if you're finding it's just a little over, I find when you start working with 4 hues, there's so many different hues to work with. It can get a little bit mind-boggling. So don't hesitate to just do something super simple, like go to a monochrome and just work with purple or magenta, or, you know, you have a lot of blue in here, just make it blue and just have a monochrome palette. And that will really, I think, set you up for success with regard to choosing the colors. Okay, so that's the main thing I'd work on here. We could talk a little bit more about the design, but I think that the main focus at this point should be really just fine-tuning those colors a little bit more. Okay, let's look at your next design. Okay, so here's the tetrad, and I think, yeah, so the same thing basically here is, it looks like you're adding in quite a few. This is your yellow and your orange, and it looks like they're moving quite a bit between those two. That looks great. That looks good. This is maybe shifting right in between these two, and it looks maybe like that one's good. So just do what I said before. Just, you know, mark down the hues mark down the hues in the color picker. Make sure you stay really close to those hues. And if, you know, having 4 hues is too much to work with, just reduce it. I really think that is always very beneficial. You know, again, you could work with a monochrome or an analogous or a split complement, you know, just has 2 colors in it. It makes it a little bit easier. In terms of the color, you know, the design itself, I think this is really coming along. I could see experimenting with it a little bit more. I really, you know, this element you have here is a really interesting element with the circle, with the empty center. And I could see adding more of those. You know, maybe even adding a little bit of a thicker stroke here, but adding more of those. So, you know, there's, they have more repetition, you know, which will create more of a sense of them belonging in the design. So just keep experimenting, you know, don't hesitate to pull things off the edge of the design. That often makes a design more interesting, is, you know, to take shapes and pull them off the edges. And I like what you're doing here with the diminishing sizes, and also working with these colors to make them appear that they're floating away by making them, you know, follow the depth principles we talked about, which is desaturating. So I'd keep working with those. Again, just to make sure that you know, really work with the correct color harmony, and then maybe experiment with the design a little bit more. Okay, Thierry, so in your, so I'm starting with task 1, and so here are your thumbnails, and it looks to me like this is we have two creative prompts. One was the wallpaper pattern and one was an artwork for like a book cover or, you know, some type of maybe an album cover. I think those are some of the ideas there. And so this is the grayscale version of it. And yeah, I think you've got a good start here with your designs. Um, and I think I've looked through your designs and I think you chose this one, so I'll focus a little bit more on that one. But in both your designs, something I would think about a little bit more is activating the background a little bit more. It looks like you've got maybe a lot of sort of empty space in the back. So how can you maybe make that, tie that in a little bit more? Um, so, um, you know, maybe you could repeat some of these shapes and, you know, maybe you could add another type of pattern in the back, you know, sort of think about that, what you might want to do in the background. Or maybe you could just take this entire unit and repeat it and, you know, place it in different places in the background, you know, so this could be repeated. Some of the other things just to watch too is the use of the outline here. I'd recommend probably taking that out maybe. We talked about outlines back in Milestone 1 and how they tend to be, you know, they're not really a bad thing necessarily, but when we look at color theory, it can be a little bit difficult to work with color because color doesn't have a chance to blend or work together. So you might want to take that out. Maybe experiment with the design a little bit more. You know, it can be hard to work with free-form shapes to make them look kind of intentional. And so sometimes it's sometimes easier just to work with geometric shapes like these circles. So you might want to just base it on a circle design. That could be a really good idea. So, and then the same thing with this one, I might take this element and maybe repeat it a few times or work with something in the background just to kind of create a little bit more substance to the design. Okay, so let's go to the second one here where you added the color. Okay, so you've got a complement here and a, looks to me like maybe a triad. So, yeah, I think definitely the complement is working the best here. And part of the reason why the complement is working better is because you have not a lot of areas to color in. We talked about that in previous group critiques, how having a lot more, you know, more spaces to color in can help you develop the colors a little bit more. When you don't have a lot of spaces, individual spaces, then you don't have a chance to really distribute the colors and experiment with, you know, the hues. In terms of the tints, tones, and shades, you know, the assignment wants you to experiment with those. And I can see that happening here and not so much here. And that's, again, it's just because your design is a little simple. You know, it's more almost like a logo as opposed to like a fully formed artwork. So how to solve that? Again, just going back to the previous feedback of adding a little more dimension to your design, maybe some kind of pattern in the background or, you know, repeating those shapes, just kind of developing it a little bit more. That's what I would probably recommend. But, you know, I would say within the design you have, definitely go with that complement. I think that's the best choice. Okay, let's look at the next one. Okay, and that's the choice. Yes, good. That's the choice I would make. I think it's starting to look, yeah. So with this design, I think the main thing, you just want to activate the background space, maybe kind of, you know, maybe kind of clean up some of these lines, like see if you can remove some of these sort of this unintentional little kind of glitches in the design. Smooth things out a little bit, maybe round some of these shapes, you know. But I think this could work with maybe a little bit more development of the background. So, okay, all right. Well, I'm glad you had a chance to submit all of your work. I know it's been a little bit of a challenge this session to get things in on time, but it's great that you had a chance to get it in for this last critique. And let me know if you have any questions.